Good morning. It's just after 5 a.m. here in Calgary, and we're going to be talking about downward dog and wrists, right? Because those two seem to go together a little like a peanut butter and jam sandwich, which we don't actually want, even though I love peanut butter and jam sandwiches. The point being is that it's so often we hear about elbow and even wrist issues when people do a lot of downward dogs. And so I want to share a series here to help you explore that a lot of the wrist and the elbow issues that we experience in downward facing dog have very little to do with the wrist at all. And so there's lots of techniques to get people kind of out of the pain when they're actually in downward dog, like fisting their hands or cupcaking their hands or doing a lot of strengthening through the hands. And that could work. Don't get me wrong, that could work. The question that you have to ask yourself, is it a sustainable gain, or do you have to always and consistently do it? And if you're always having to consistently do something with your hands, then there's something that is missing. There's a gap. And I tend to find that the gap exists up and through here. So through the rib cage, through the shoulder blades, how the arm bone will work with the shoulder blades. And the reason for that is because there are a ton of big muscles up here which control this kinetic chain in part. So if they are not doing a good job at their role of controlling and coordinating, then we're going to fall into the wrist. Yeah? And so we need to look at that when we look at dog. So that's what we're going to play with today. So how we're going to do this is you're going to do one dog to begin with and just notice what your dog feels like. And then we're going to do a couple of little movements and then come back into dog and then do a movement and then come back into dog and notice how you start to feel when you're doing your dog. So what I've got here for the practice is I've got a strap and I've got a spinal strip, but you don't need to have a spinal strip. You can use a rolled mat in the same way that I use the spinal strip. You can also use a folded blanket. A bolster is a little too big and wide for this particular movement. But you can use something that looks a little like this, like a pool noodle, a rolled mat, that kind of thing. All right? If you have a roller, that will be an optional tool. Let's go into downward facing dog. So hands, however you want them to be, in your tabletop, however you want that to be. You choose the way you do your dog. Toes come under, and then let's come on up into your version of downward dog. This one is, for me, definitely the first one of the morning, of the day. And just get a feel for where and how that feels, like where the weight is in your body and what your desire is to try and move your weight if that is something that you want to do. So the key is that awareness. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to take, whether you've got this strip or whether you've got a rolled mat or a pool noodle, or a folded blanket, you're going to place this strip right opposite the bottom of your breastbone, okay? So if you're wearing a bra, then that bra band is where this is going to go, yeah? So right about that area, opposite the bottom of the breastbone. If you know your spinal vertebrae, it's about T7, T8. And we're going to be here for just a little bit. We're not going to do anything other than settle into this. So you can just settle into your breathing and notice what it is that you feel. Now, for some of you, what you're going to feel is some strain where that edge of whatever prop is that you're using, or you're going to feel something in your SI or your back or something like that possibly, or you'll feel an increase of strain in through your neck. That could be all the things that we don't want to feel that could show up. So you can do one of two things. The first is you could lift your hips up a little bit. And notice if you lift your hips up, that takes the strain away. And then place a block underneath your hips. Okay? If that doesn't work, or if the neck and the jaw stuff is kind of peaking a bit, then I would roll off of the prop. And we'll do the next exercise together, but just not on the prop, whatever it is, whether it's the rolled mat or the strip or a folded blanket. This movement here, you can see is a back bend, right? So what it's asking of the body is to have the front line of the body release. And just because somebody can get into that movement, into that shape, so to speak, doesn't mean they actually moved well into it. So just because you're there doesn't mean you moved well into it, yeah? And so when there's strain in it, or even after you come out of it, that lets us know that there's something that's been a bit snagged. I can't tell you what because I can't see you, but there's been something that's been snagged. And I get that it can be really difficult sometimes to figure it out because it's going through your mind of, well, I got into it. What's the big deal? And the big deal is that whatever the big deal is actually in your level of unawareness. So right now, I would just roll off of it and then lie on your back for the next movement. And it's likely giving you some insight about your torso. Okay, so let's come into the movement with your strap now. Those of you who are liking being on the strip, stay on the strip or the rolled mat or whichever you're on. And those of you who are flat on your back, we're all going to take the strap. And I'm taking the strap in my hands. So my hands are about shoulder width apart. And I'm raising the arms up to the sky. And then I'm bringing them back. So the movement is actually a shoulder blade retraction as they come back to the spine, and a protraction as they come away from the spine. But what you'll notice is my elbows are not bending. It's just my arms that are raising and lowering. Yeah? Hands are pointed toward the sky. Now, when you're on the strip or the rolled mat, you tend to be a bit more obvious that your blades are moving into retraction and protraction. It's a little less obvious, I find, for people when they're on the floor. So that's why I typically say just notice your arms, and your arms are lifting and then coming away. But it's that whole kinetic chain. And if you can perceive your blades, it becomes interesting to notice what it is that you're doing. And if your blades are sticky and you want to straighten and bend your elbows instead, that's kind of curious. Yeah, it's likely contributing to what's going on with your wrist. Okay, now we're taking the arms over your head, still holding onto the strap. And the reason why I like a strap is because it really helps me see which arm is leading or which arm is following, if that is happening, or if there's any kind of wobble. The furthest you're going to go is in line with your ears. But here's the thing. Follow the trajectory of movement and notice if there's any clunk or any click. Notice if there's any wobble. And I'd like you to move in a range that there's no click or clunk and that there's no wobble. See if you can reduce the compensation here, because those compensations are letting you know that something is up in through that shoulder girdle, and that's having an impact probably on how you do your dog. Also notice your rib cage. And as you bring the arms overhead, does your rib cage want to push out, like your spine starts to extend and you go into a bit more of a back bend through your spine? And then just move only as far as the ribs don't move. Okay. And when you've done that one, then come on out and then lie onto your back, or just take the arms down and just lie for a moment. Notice what has just happened in your body. And then let's come on up back to downward dog, and let's see what's happened. So coming into your same setup, and then up we come into dog. And notice if anything is new or different in your dog. Good. Okay, lovely. Now, one thing I was mentioning when you're taking the arms overhead is watching to notice as the arm comes up, if your ribs wanted to poke forward. Yeah? Because the movement, the articulating joint is the arms are moving through the shoulder socket with that one we were just doing with the strap. And so if you're doing a movement that's intended to be the arm bone in the shoulder socket, but then you're now extending through your spine and your ribs are poking out, well, now that movement is becoming a rib/spine movement. So this is now what your brain thinks is shoulder flexion, meaning arm coming up alongside the ear, right? That's what your brain thinks. And so then when you start to do this movement of arm overhead, it becomes this compensatory pattern. But that's not what the movement actually is. The movement is supposed to be the arm bone movement in the shoulder socket. So when you, so if you build the compensatory pattern, then you're not enabling forces to move very well through your body, and you're not enabling a good absorption and dissipation. So as we bear load through our hands, now we don't have a really stable structure up in here, or a less stable structure, we should say, and then we can land into our hands. And so when we simply reduce the compensations of what we're doing, we start allowing the tissue to move the way it's meant to move, and we get a better brain-body connection. And in that better brain-body connection, what it's called is it's better motor coordination. There's better neuromuscular coordination, which is underlying all the stability and strength that we are wanting to have us not be in the wrists, right? So when we aren't stable here, when this is not functioning well, and it could be because of mobility, it could be because of stability, it could be because of strength, right? It could be many reasons up in through this area, but many people will land in their wrist or their elbow or both, right? And so when we clear this stuff up here, like I was just showing you, and really making it less of a compensation, we are on the road to having that not happen, okay? So now where I want you to go, and this is where you can use your roller, is we're gonna come into a child's pose. Now my roller is not in this room right now, so I'm using a medicine ball, but you'll get the same idea. You're going to start by coming into child's pose, and you could stay here with your bum on your heels. Now, if this is not working for you with bum on heels, then you can take your arms out like so. That makes it easier, okay? And then from here, you're going to take the arms out to one side, right? So if this is 12 o'clock, this is now about 1 or 2 o'clock. My bum is still on my heels, so I'm only moving my arms and coming into the side bend as far as my hips stay on my heels, okay? So maybe you're coming over here, you're from 12, like just be aware of what's going on between your rib cage and your hips, because if you go too far and your tissue is a little bit snaggy, then your hips are gonna wanna come up, yeah? Okay, and then other side. Good, and then let's use the roller if you've got it. So with the roller, you can start to roll out with the prop. And so you might find that you just get a little bit more of something when you do that. And then taking the roll over to one side. And you can think about pushing a little bit more with that left. If you're moving to your right, then pushing a bit more with the left arm. And if you're moving to your left, pushing a bit more with your right. Okay, and then over to the other side. Good. Okay, and then let that go. Come back to tabletop, and let's come into your downward dog again. And up you come. Now notice if there's anything different or new happening in your dog. Good. Okay, so now we're going to take one arm out to the side. We're just going to roll that arm forward and back. So we're moving through the shoulder joint and the blade. Shoulder joint and the blade. Okay, so if you look at it from this side, shoulder joint and the blade. Now, one thing that can happen, particularly if you are a little sticky in through your blade, then you might move more at the forearm like this, right? So you can see how I'm moving down through here. And this is a movement of supination and pronation, which is just the forearm. And I can do that without moving my shoulder. But I actually want you to move your shoulder. And this might be kind of tough, particularly if you've got some wrist stuff going on. That can be really, really tough. But see if you can find that. And then you want your blade to be coming up and then back. Now again, watch too, that sometimes in and around here, we try to pull down the blade this way. And what's important to know is that the muscles that pull your blade down are your lower trapezius, and they come on the inside of the blade towards the spine, not here. So you don't need to move this side of you to bring your blade down. So notice if that's what you're doing. And then make the movement a little smaller so that you can really find it in here, even if it's a little sticky. Because if it's sticky, at least you're discovering that it's sticky, right? And then, watch my mic, Suze. And then here, starting to move that arm. Here. And so you're not generating it from here. It's not coming from the forearm. So it's not this. And you can see how I'm moving through my shirt here. Okay. And it's not this. Now you're seeing likely something up in here. That's not a bad thing because the blade is coming up. So the muscles that attach from the blade to the neck, those are going to be involved. If I was just wanting to move my arm bone here and only my arm bone in the socket, then I wouldn't want to see those. But because the blade is moving, the whole thing is coming around. Okay, now from here, let that go. Come back to your dog. Let's see what happens. So from table, all right, good, and notice what you notice. All right, let's do another side bend. So I'm here in a kneeling position. I'm going to come into a side bend like this, thinking around coming around a big beach volleyball. Keeping my sitting bone on the side I'm moving away from. I'm keeping that down, not anchored. I'm not pulling it down, but I'm really only allowing myself to go over as far as I can still feel contact. So whether you're sitting on a bolster or on a block, there's still contact with that sitting bone on whatever you're sitting on. And then if it's available, you can take the arm right up. Good. And then up. Okay, good. And then other side. Now you don't need to bring the arm with. You need to feel into yourself, right? Because remember, I can't see you. And I can't quite determine if what you're doing is working or not. So you have to really feel into it yourself. All right, and then let that come out. Okay, let's come back to dog. Let's see what happened. Good job. Great. Okay, so now coming onto your back, and let's now come into a Shavasana, and let's feel now what you feel in terms of your upper body and your rib cage, your shoulder blades. Just notice what you now are aware of, having really only focused in on this upper area of your body and how that dissipates throughout the rest of your body. And then you can just allow that awareness to permeate through. Now you might have the feeling of like, this is not quite complete because we haven't really done anything for the lower body. So by all means, do something a little bit more after this practice. Whatever you do, allow that awareness to seep into the next steps of your life. You have a really great practice. Have a great rest of your day, and we will see you tomorrow morning. Mwah. Take good care.